Hello, everyone, and welcome to the exclusive Nobody Studios Culture Livestream show. I'm Sejal Thakkar, your host for this live stream, and today we're going to talk about a really important topic of neurodiversity. And for those that have been following me along on this live stream, I had a conversation on this topic with Dr. Eric Reese, who's the director of health and wellness at the studio. And if you haven't seen that one, I strongly recommend that you watch it. It's on our YouTube channel because I went back and watched it last night because I wanted to make sure that we covered different information today than I covered with him. And I learned so much just watching that. He dropped so many nuggets of wisdom in that episode. But today we're going to continue that conversation, but really dive deep into specifically talking about dyslexic thinking and how that can drive innovation. And so to guide us during this conversation, I invited a very special guest, one of our very valuable equity crowdfunders, Marnix Langstraat. Welcome to the show, Marnix.
Thank you.
Did I say your name, the last name right? Because that's the first time. All right, perfect. So Marnix is incredible. I spoke with him. We connected for the first time a few weeks ago. And when I found out about the incredible work that he's doing to really raise awareness in this area, I knew I wanted to get him into this show as quickly as possible because, we've always said at Nobody Studios that we're going to be, the studio is defined by the people that we attract to this journey and people like Marnix, right, that are going to really help us elevate our culture to the next level. And so, Marnix, I would love it if you could share a little bit about your background, about the incredible work you're doing at Dyslexic Disruptors, and anything else you want us to know.
Yeah, of course. To go back to basically my start of my career, I've always worked at the bigger companies. I started in consulting with Accenture, Ernst & Young, to drop a few names. And then I had most of my career within one of the great companies within the Netherlands, always on the crossroads of strategy, innovation, and finance, mostly M&A, merger and acquisitions. But at the age of 13, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. So all of my educational years weren't that much fun. But especially the first years within my career, I didn't feel it as a hindrance. It just wasn't there. But moving up in the ranks, especially at the grid company, I started to basically knock on the glass ceiling, which is there. And that's around middle management layers. And then I discovered my dyslexia and what it did for me in business. And that's about 14 years ago now. And I started to delve deeper into what is then dyslexia and dyslexic thinking. And a couple of years, I think, 2 years ago, during COVID, I had some more time available than usual. And I started my company, Dyslexic Disruptors, which is a social cause to spread awareness around dyslexic thinking, but also some consulting services helping business to thrive and discover their talent within their companies and how to use dyslexic thinking as a added value, as a competitive edge.
I love it. And we're going to dig more into the work that you're doing. But as I said, when I was preparing for this yesterday and I was reading online, I mean, there's even a debate just about what that means, dyslexic thinking. I always do this with all my guests. I'm like, let's start there. How do you define that? And then that way everybody knows the conversation is around how you're defining that, right?
Well, dyslexic thinking is a term which has been defined Made by Dyslexia. Made by Dyslexia is a foundation within the UK, which does a great job of promoting dyslexic thinking or dyslexics within education, but also within business. So if you're interested in the topic, do definitely check them out as well. But for me, dyslexic thinking is is synonymously for transformative thinking. And one of the great books and research comes from the US, which is The Dyslexic Advantage by Brock and Vinette Eide. That's a book where a lot of research has been put in. And what basically dyslexic thinking for me is that I prefer to use my right hemisphere and episodic memory system. And those are systems we all have as humans, and we as babies use those systems primarily. But when we go to the educational system, and the educational system learns us to use the part of our left brain and our systematic memory systems. So basically using everything which we experience, putting them in generic terms and storing them in our memory. But for some of us, the dyslexic ones, do not have the preference to use that left side of our brain, and we keep using our right side of our brain also for reading and writing and spelling. And that's why we can definitely learn it, but we're not talented in it. And the funny thing is, if you take some other research and you look at the outcomes of research specifically for looking at complex tasks and so forth and complex problem solving, all people will use their right hemisphere and their episodic memory systems. But we as dyslexics are trained for that.
Yeah, one of that's I'm grateful that you use that example, because one of the misconceptions that I've heard, and again, I'm learning a lot about this just from the research that I've done in this conversation already. But one of the things that I heard is that, especially, I remember a couple of people that I went to law school with were dyslexic, and some of the things that one of the misconceptions that I remember one person saying was that these individuals are not good at reading and writing, right? And so what I hear you saying is that, yeah, but they can practice and they can learn and they can get better at it, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you saying is that, yes, there may be those challenges in those areas, but when I think of the people that I've known and just some of the case studies that I read about last night, they often excel in all these other areas like visual thinking or problem solving, right?
And I don't see it as a challenge. I rather would talk about a lack of talent. So I always say I've got a lack of talent in reading, writing, and spelling. I can learn it, but I won't never be good at it. Just as I have a lack of talent in certain sports or in coding, which is something I would love to be able to do, but it's just not something.
I totally get it. I totally get it, Marnix. Well, I think we all do. You know, we're not all good at every single thing that we do, right? Like there's a stereotype about Indians, about how all Indians are great at math. You know, well, apparently I missed that boat, so I went to law school instead, right? So I love that you're talking about that, but I would love it if you could. I love the definition you gave, but let's dig a little bit deeper. What are some of the other misconceptions that people have about dyslexic thinking? And I think, a live stream like this is excellent because we can raise awareness on this topic that can lead to greater acceptance and understanding, right? So let's go through maybe a couple more misconceptions that might be floating on around there.
Well, I think two of them for me stick out. And one is, the first one is that dyslexia isn't coupled to intellect. And which is a great misconception, especially in during the school years, during the educational years. A lot of dyslexics feel stupid or are being seen as lazy, and so forth. And there's enough research around it that dyslexia isn't coupled with intellect. And if you look at the group, there's even an overrepresentation of gifted people within the group of dyslexia as well. Um, so I would almost say that we're a little bit ahead of the curve instead of lazy or stupid. Only we don't thrive in educational systems because we're not talented in the reading, writing, and spelling. So
Yeah, and
that's probably the first one, and a real important one, especially for all the self-esteem and so forth, which plays a big role into all the later years. I still struggle with that. I still have a big um, imposter syndrome, for example. Yeah,
yeah. And we have what you're saying, by the way, Marnix, is really resonating with a lot of people. I had my friend Susanna Ryan Machingo. I worked with her at a law firm a long time ago. She signed on and she said, fascinating conversation so far. I hope I can catch a replay. Thanks for this content. So it's really resonating with her. We also have our director of our Idea Lab at Nobody Studios, Min Bogeda. Welcome, Min. I'm so glad you're joining us. And he's sharing
I
some
mean,
resources in the chat. And he said, he made this comment here, and this was, I was going to point this out too, is that everything from the light bulb to the iPhone to the plane to the car
yeah,
was all invented by dyslexic thinking, right?
yeah, oh, definitely,
Yeah, yeah,
and lots more, and lots of art and great movies. The vacuum cleaner of Dyson, for example, IKEA
yeah.
furniture. Yeah,
That I read somewhere that Steve Jobs was dyslexic too. And I don't know, I didn't confirm that, but one of the articles I read said that. And so I think you were going to go on and talk about one more misconception, right? I think I might have cut you off with all these comments that were coming into the chat.
yeah. Well, the other great misconception I feel is that people view it as a disability. And I looked up the definition of disability, which is really broad and basically makes us all disabled. But what they mean with that it's a disability, that it influences your life to doing the normal things in life. And I don't think that's true. Maybe for um, a real small group which have severe dyslexia and basically can't really function in a literacy aspect of the world. But I think for the vast majority of dyslexic, it doesn't feel like a disability at all. And it isn't, because especially when we get older, we're going to join the workforce, then there are so many tools available to help us with the lack of talent on the reading, writing, and spelling, that it maybe can be seen as a hindrance for sure, but not a disability at all.
Yeah, and I know there's so many definitions of disability, right? In the legal sense, it would be that, a person may need some reasonable accommodation to be able to do their jobs, right?
Yeah,
And
but we
so,
all do.
yeah. And so that's what I'm saying. It's depending on which definition you look at it,
Yeah,
and I love how you put it, is that we all need support in certain areas, right? And I look
yeah,
at it that way, is how can we support our teams so that they can thrive, right? So that's a perfect segue
sure.
into the next question I was going to ask you, because one of the aspects of our Nobody Studio culture that resonated with me right from the beginning when I joined the studio, which was almost 2.5 years ago, was the openness of our culture. There was right away I felt it. That there was this recognition that we're all different from each other, and that
Yeah,
and those differences are valued, because we know that that's what's going to help us accomplish our crazy goal of building 100 companies in 5 years, right? I just love saying that because I felt that right away. And I know Min's on here. I know he and I have had several conversations where we had that feeling of that acceptance, right out of the gate. And so, what are some tips you have for organizations like ours? And I would even say if you could specifically address sort of our type of culture, which is a global culture, right? We have people all over the globe.
yeah.
You being one of them, right? You're one of our equity crowdfunders, and you're located where? You're in
In Europe, in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and I'm in California right now. We've got people
Yeah.
all over. Min's in London, right? So keeping that in mind with the kind of the practical, I guess, tips I'm looking for, and then also the other thing that kind of adds a wrinkle to our unique culture at Nobody Studios is that we're remote. Everybody works virtually, and a lot of us haven't even met yet, right? So we're meeting some people through. We've seen most of us have seen each other on Zoom at a meeting or something like that, but we're all over the place. And so virtual meetings is really a primary way that we're going to be interacting with each other. And so when we're talking about how do we make people who have dyslexic thinking, as their primary, how do we make them feel like their difference is welcome, that we value it, and
Yep.
and make them feel like they belong in our culture? What are some things that we should be doing or we could be doing?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're already doing is amazing. Being so open and being so welcoming, um, in all kinds of diversities, and I think that also accounts for well, it should account for the success of Nobody Studios until now. Um, and if you look at it specifically, dyslexic thinking, it's the same. It, be curious about what we can add to, and focus on the added value we bring. And I think that's also a responsibility of every employee, is that he or she should be able to articulate what he brings to the table, what value he adds to that. And then that's primarily, the primary focus of employment. And then secondary, maybe we can have a conversation about what kind of tools you can use, or does somebody, if you need to make a presentation, for example, that someone looks at the spelling mistakes or the whatever. Um, but I think it begins with being open and being curious about what the other person is bringing to the table, and to talk about it, and to understand each other. Yeah.
I love those. Those are such practical tips. And I agree with you 100%. I probably say this statement at least 5 times a week, right? It all starts by raising awareness about the
Yeah.
value of diverse thinking, right? That's really about it. And I would just add on, and really highlight, which I do all the time in our studio, is that it starts with leadership setting the tone. We are the role
Yeah,
models,
for
and
sure.
if we can talk about it, that we're diverse and we're inclusive all day until we're blue in the face. But if our actions don't
Yeah,
support that, then
for sure.
everybody can smell that from a mile away, right? And I'll
Yeah.
just, and I wanted to ask you this too, because, like I said at the very beginning, when I first talked to you about what the work that you're doing, immediately my head went through, first of all, I was curious about why you joined the Nobody Studio journey. So I would love to hear about what inspired you to join the journey. But also, before we end this conversation, at some point, I want to make sure I ask you this question before I forget, is how do you want to take what I call your superpower? And I'm not really referring to dyslexic thinking as your superpower, but what I'm referring to is just the skills, the talent that you have in
Yeah.
helping to make sure that we do this right at the studio. How do you want to help Nobody Studios and contribute your skill and talent to making sure that we are welcoming to all types of thinking,
Yeah.
especially dyslexic thinking in the context of this conversation?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, the first question you asked is what drew me to Nobody
Yeah.
Studios, and I think what definitely drew me to it was the big audacious goal of building 100 companies in 5 years, which is, I think, well, no, I need to add to that you want to build 100. No, you wanna, you're gonna build 100 companies which
Right.
improve the world as well. I think
Yes.
that's a real important part of the journey as well. It's not
Absolutely.
just 100 companies to make a shitload of money, but it's 100 companies which improve the well-being of humans here on the planet, and I think that makes it additionally special.
Absolutely.
Um, um, and so that was the first one. And looking from a finance perspective, you need those numbers to be successful. because you know most of them will probably not work out, and you'll probably have a couple of nuggets, and then you'll need 100 companies in order to have real nuggets and not
That's right.
just partial nuggets.
Yeah.
um, so as long as we live in a capitalist world, you need those numbers, and to be able to sustain such a great company and help to raise further. So that was the first thing, and the second thing was the crowdfunding, for sure,
Mhm.
um, which is relatively different. And as we already talked about, it it, it wasn't about the investments the investors contributed. It was about building the culture, building the diversity within Nobody Studios, and thriving from that diversity. Because if you want to do something new and you want to create new companies, you need to have diversity of thought, diversity of background, experience, gender, whatever, and to be able to come up with new ideas and to come up with great companies. So,
I
for
love
sure.
all of that. I
Yeah,
love it. I love it. I love asking that question to people. And so
I
then
can
leading
imagine.
into the next question, like how, we reached out to you because you're one of our equity crowdfunders and said, "Hey, how
Yep.
do you want to be involved?" Because you're an owner in the studio. And earlier you said, "Well, a small owner," and I don't really view it like
Yeah.
that. I really don't. I think we're all owners. It's not really, like we said, that wasn't a play for money. Um, that was
No.
really to build our Nobody Studios community so that we can turn these companies out quickly. We can get feedback from our investors, get their skills, their talent, like I was telling you. And so, that was when you first joined, was when our equity crowdfunding campaign was going on. But now you've had several interactions with people at the studio. You've had a chance to watch what we've done since the equity crowdfunding campaign. We've been very visible, very transparent, and
Yeah.
but what are some ways that you want to contribute as far as, with your talent, with some of
Yeah.
the work that you're doing with dyslexic disruptors? And I would just say specifically, I would love to know as far as our culture goes, from a culture perspective. But I'm
Yeah.
sure there's other things. Just hearing you talk, I'm thinking you probably need to talk to Min if you haven't
Well,
already about the Idea
yeah.
Lab. There's so many different places we can use your skill set, right?
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at it from a personal side, I already talked to Min. Min has one of my ideas still uh, working on. So, Min, if you're listening, come back to me where we stand on that. But my experience, of course, within strategy, innovation, and M&A is, I think, really handy for the studio, and I would love to contribute it on those skills. And dyslexic thinking is, I think, imperative for the Nobody Studios, because dyslexic thinkers, transformative thinkers, are here to work on companies, and that's exactly where Nobody Studios makes his business from. So I think that the diversity of mind, so the combination between transformative thinkers and um, non-transformative thinkers, so doers, is exactly what you need as a culture to make sure that the Nobody Studios and all its companies will thrive. And I love that Mark really um, looks at the companies you're building from a scarcity model. So do not overfund them. Make
Yes.
sure that people need to be creative, um, need to find different ways of making it. And I think that sets you apart, it sets us apart from most of, well, at least last decade, uh, venture builders, because money was, of course, really, really cheap. So it was overspent on
That's right.
luscious ideas which never would be able to make money. And I think a lot of them fell down, expecting in the coming years more to strength. So yeah.
That's right. I love it. Wait, so now you got me curious. And by the way, Min said, I hear you, my friend. So he'll get back to you about the idea. But now I want to know, what was that idea that you submitted to the Idea Lab? Let me hear about it and put it out there.
Yeah, we can't get Min on stage, can we? It was one of the things. One of the ideas I had is that we can transform real estate and real estate agencies, because basically every house is for sale.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, you've got my curiosity piqued. And so there we go, everybody. This is a perfect place for us to end our episode. But Marnix, is there anything else you want to add on this topic of dyslexic thinking for, leaders out there, words of wisdom, any sort of last advice that you want to share with everybody? And also, how can everybody get a hold of you if they want to learn more, if they want to retain your services? Tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. Well, of course, we've got a website, dyslexicdisruptors.com. We're on LinkedIn, of course, and you can send us an email on info@dyslexicdisruptors.com. And we'll be glad to hear what you're working on and what kind of problems you need to be solving. Or, of course, do awareness sessions, which we do regularly about dyslexic thinking and how your business can thrive from it. And the other thing, I think we need to be curious about each other. I think that's the main takeaway from my experience with looking at dyslexic thinking in business. And there's still a lot to be explored and to be researched about dyslexic thinking and what it is. And I think every one of us can be a dyslexic thinker because we've got all the same brains.
I love it. I love it. And, we're doing at Nobody Studios every week, we're bringing in a speaker from Ovations, which is one of our new co's, to come talk to us, our leadership team and our current team about various topics. And so, Marnix, if you haven't already done that, I would love to bring you in to have you talk to our team for this on this topic. So make sure you have an 8-minute topic listed on there, and I'll pass the word along to our chief of staff, Tiffany Hansen, to get you booked for one of our sessions when it's appropriate, because I think it's such an important topic, and I know that our team would really appreciate that information. So I'll touch base with you afterwards on that to confirm and move forward on that. Also, I just want to remind you and anybody else that's watching. We are in Ovations are getting ready to roll out these sort of bundle speaker series that will be going out. I'm a captain for the diversity inclusion series. And so, Marnix, again, I would love to include you and throw your hat into the speaker list for my series. But, this is something we're super excited about. It's going to be a 12-week series and in a lot of different functional areas like innovation, leadership, where, organizations can bring speakers like Marnix and a lot of talented speakers that really are doing this work from true passion and really want to help move the needle and challenge status quo in a lot of different areas. So super excited about what's to come from Nobody Studios and Ovations. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for, joining us today. Make sure you reach out to Marnix and learn about this topic, because again, it all starts with raising our awareness and recognizing that, whether it's dyslexic thinking or some other kind of neurodiverse thinking, it's not just a weakness. It's, it's a part of who we are, and we can always support people to thrive. Right. And so, Marnix, thank you again for joining me today. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to our future collaborations.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a great day, Marnix. Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.